Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Red Wheelbarrow Poetry Society. Our featured poet this evening is Maneo Mohale, excuse. Um, Maneo, I'm delighted to be the host this evening. I've long been waiting for this opportunity. If you would like to introduce your poems, where and what you'll be reading from, new work, and if it's from Everything is a Deathly Flower. If you want to do that introduction, please do that. We are just your audience, and there will be, if you're okay with that, we will have an opportunity for some questions or comments, that sort of thing. You don't have to record that, but that's generally how we do things. But not for too long. So you'd read for 30 to 35 minutes or so, and then we'll stop and talk for a little bit, have a quick break, and then we open the mic. Okay. Fantastic. The floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you for your time, for your presence, for your craft.
Oh, thank you for having me here. Also, I really love, I think testament to my nerves is because I know when I'm reading to the Red Wheelbarrow folks that I'm mostly reading to other poets. And that's just also just this big, it activates a giant thing in me of wanting to respect everyone, but also of wanting to grab this opportunity with both of my hands. So firstly, thank you to everyone at the Red Wheelbarrow. It's so wonderful to see familiar faces and new faces as well in the room. Um, and I have primarily, I think it's all new work today, with a few little throwbacks, which is really exciting. And there'll be like little bits and pieces um, that feel familiar, especially here at the Wheelbarrow. Since you first published my Poppy, you published my Papava Somniferum first, and then you published my Sistina, that I'll read later. I'm so excited to read, also because I feel like it had time to breathe and grow its own legs. But yeah, I think the three sort of main spaces that I'm moving through in the new work, I'm thinking very seriously about language. One of my favorite writers is a novelist called Don DeLeo, and he said something that resonated with me like back in the 70s. He said that I began to suspect that language was not just an instrument in my work, but also a subject. And I think with these new, very strange little blossoms that are uh, popping out of the soil, that there is a lot of experimentation, and there's also a kind of like insularity that I'm curious to kind of hear out loud. So this also feels good because this will be the first time reading out loud of a few of them. So okay, that's as much of a preamble. Also to it's always important for me in my work just to issue a content warning or a trigger warning. A lot of my work deals with violence, though obliquely, though I kind of approach violence from a space that's deeply informed by artists like Gabrielle Goliath, um, where of trying to kind of represent violence without reproducing it. So I'm very aware that a lot of my subject matter is quite activating. So please, especially because we're all zooming, please feel free to keep your camera on, keep your camera off, stretch, and do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable and safe in the space. Yes, and without more ado, I want to read a new piece, which is sort of like I'm calling them footnotes to Everything is a Deathly Flower. So this is my first book for everyone who's encountering me for the first time. Back in 2019, I was lucky enough to publish my first baby, a collection of 31 poems called Everything is a Deathly Flower. Um, a sort of strange, twisted garden where I get to play with time, and play with monstrosity and the grotesque, and play with beauty and play with trauma and violence. And Gabrielle Goliath, the incredible South African artist who I mentioned just now, who I'm just endlessly learning from, I wrote sort of footnotes to my book for her. So the first thing that I want to read is an excerpt from a piece called Coda, Bird of Paradise. Let me sip my wine, child. Ooh. Okay. Coda, bird of paradise. Footnotes to everything is a deathly flower. Prelude. The tale of two Leahs. Behold a vision. The first of the Leahs reveals that I am an exquisitely sensitive thing. Leah Lakshmi lifted the three-striped veil and taught me a hard femme poetic. This is my lineage, but the nut is hidden somewhere in a confession booth ringed by marimbas somewhere in Bedford View, babe. If all good stories have a desert in them, the second of the Leahs reveals that I've always been dusted and dancing, staring outward toward the ochred quiet, waiting for God to touch me. 7 is a small number, don't you think, for the deadly sins? Tavia, Sylvia, Catherine, Hortense wink at me. Europe can be the exotic one if you know how to look. This is the thick line of my lineage. It is long and infinite. We might as well pick it up. Here, I thank Leah Pipshna Samarasina. I thank Leah Horlick. I thank Noni Jabavu. I thank Tavia Nyongo. I thank Sylvia Winter. I thank Catherine McKittrick. I thank Hortense Spillers. I thank Octavia Butler. I thank Saul Blakey. I thank Bessie Head. I thank Olive Schreiner. I thank J. Logan Smilches. I thank Richard Sicken for showing me the way. Lidzitz. This winter, it will be 10 years since my sexual assault. It's been 10 years, and I've been an awful lover to the sun. A small tour of footnotes written in pencil stretched like rope to give air to the spell. Benoni was founded in 1881, in the first ecstatic moans of Johannesburg's gold rush. Black hands on white shovels, black hands on shovels, black hands. And C.A. Conrad ushers me this way, quick, quiet, bring the body with you when you think. It's slower, but it gives breath to the lungs of the poem. Benoni, branched to Jacob and Rachel, Benjamin, Jacob renamed. What an indication. Prophetic a little. Son of my sorrow, or in other translations, son of my pain. Rachel was dying. Benjamin, son of the right side. The Bible is a hand drum. Catholic apostolic churches for women draped in white and blue near the bottom left of the page, above the 10th commandment, the corner of the page devoted to childhood and empire. The line begins. In school, you meet a man named Cecil John and learn the word pioneer. The 1820s settlers, mostly British, little Sethi misplacing his death drive on Queen and Country. Did you know Jehovah's Witnesses are encouraged by the Min-Man panel of the governing body to work 70 hours per month, preaching the word of God? If you work 180 hours per month and above, you're considered special. Special. Leviticus, I'm sorry for the jump scare, 18:22. I quote, men shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female. It is an abomination. Chapter 20, verse 13. If there is a man who lies with a male as those who lie with a woman, both of them have committed a detestable act. Interlude, epigraph number 1. Nakane's Piggy Boy Blues saunters into the frame soaked in it. Signal and signify. We begin again in the ocean, in its terrifying silence. If you want me to talk about time, I could, but it wouldn't help us. We are dark and currentless, still in the deep, bedded by black bone. The yawn of the Atlantic is a moan, if you know how to listen, when it opens its mouth for you. In Milton's words, into this wild abyss, the wary fiend stood on the brink of hell and looked a while, pondering his voyage. For no narrow firth he had to cross. The fabric of everything is a queer silence. What I choose to say. Jay opens their mouth, sighing. Queer silence does not always indicate an absence of rhetorical action, but may instead point to the existence of signifying acts that go unattended again and again. Flushing, Jay smiles at me from across the tables between sips of tea, skin gleaming in the sun, an exquisite reminder silence is substance, an act that can work alongside speech or entirely alone, conveying its own messages. Queer silence as pandemic form. Kagura Macharia and Jay touching hands across the table, touching gaze, touching gaze. I soak the text in queerness because it's all over my black hat. Thanks. This one's really fun, mostly because prose feels like a kind of rhythm for me. It's really hypnotic, so it's nice to warm up to. Okay, how are we feeling? Is everyone okay? Okay, amazing. We're gonna barrel ahead because we're moving through a lot. Okay, amazing. I was lucky enough to be asked by the great Mama Kasazana Aba to engage in a kind of conversation for the Johannesburg Review of Books. And it was long and very demanding because she asked me to write 2 poems. And one of them was a poem about winning the Glenalushai prize in 2020, which was amazing. But also it came with its own lessons and a good, sobering reminder about the limits of award culture and the limits of a kind of cult of individualism within poetry that really makes me uncomfortable. But it was a wonderful, and I am a such for praise. So it was wonderful to receive that. But yes, I wrote 2 really wonderful poems for Mama Kosi, and I want to read those to you. One of them is called Glen of the Bee, and another one is called Post It, From the Boy to the Being. Okay, really like this poem. It's really weird. Okay. Glenna, the bee. About my desire, grant me the green light to be honest, at least. The news found me in May, looped at the foot of the mother mountain. Cape Shimmer mirage the colony's glamour into Friday focus. When I told them, Ada honeyed me thrice. Nick and I clinked whiskey emojis and now loosed a praise song soaked in spirit back into the soil. Santu barked and Maru barked from that other place, but not yet. Mid-sentence, I thought about how Emily Dickinson said, fame is a bee with a sting and a wing. To be honest, I prefer my honey-mouthed, passed from me to mine, only to triple thrisely to the next nectars. Right. We're moving. We're grooving. I think we've got momentum now. I'm enjoying. The next one is a weird little fragment. The prompt that Mama Kosi gave me was, please write a poem that dreams about women in poetry in the South African literary landscape in 2073. My first impulse was to be a bit cheeky, I suppose, and as someone who isn't a woman but looks like one. I wanted to poke at gender a little and also to think about a poem that one has to write in a rush to the future. So this poem is called Post It, From the Boy to the Bean. Listen, cutie, I'm only living this here because I know how much you like to dig, and nothing dusts up better than a poem left at time's Achilles. Listen, Zala, I'm low on space, and the air burns and coughs its sun song now. But Mamela, babe, I have some seeds for you. For poem craft, unzip your given girl hoodie style. Put on whatever you want. Adornment isn't a prison, it's a mouth. While we still touch tongues in this house of machines, every poem remembers. Listen now. Dig for us, but don't dig us up. How are we doing? Doing good? Yes. Amazing. I'm going to ask often, mostly just to check how my sound is and how the connection is, and also how we're feeling, temperatures of the space. But I think we're doing quite well. Okay, cool. The next sequence of poems is a weird one that I still have lots of feelings about. But it was recently published in its entirety as a pack of 5 poems. It's the first of a pack of 5 poems that I read today. A second pack or a second sort of bouquet of blossoms is called Mirror Poem that I was able to write for a wonderful artist called Francis Goodson. But this pack is called Semana Santa. Uh, I think when I was 19, so a while ago, I was lucky enough um, to travel to Costa Rica, and that was the beginning of a kind of tradition as someone recovering from a kind of religious dominance, but still hungered for the theater of of ritual and prayer and church. I guess I inherited a kind of Catholicism from my father, and I miss the theater and the rituals of Catholicism. So Costa Rica was the first time I was able um, to confess in a language, or to confess or attend confession, which is the only ritual that I really miss about being a Catholic. To attend confession in a language that wasn't entirely my own. So naming the sequence Semana Santa is a kind of nod towards that. Anyway, here we go. If you're hearing barking, it's my puppy in the background. She's in puppy jail. The first poem is called Midheaven, Paternoster. And also big thanks to Ed Burl, who I think is in the room, who I first sent this to, and he sent me some really lovely feedback. So thank you so much for this. It helped a lot. I think I'll go through every single one of the poems just so that we get a sense of momentum. So here we go. First one, Midheaven, Paternoster. My dove in the cliffs of the rock and the hiding places of the mountainside. The epigraph is from Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 14. Let a good story begin with palms, double thundered in meeting, double folded in twin greeting again. Let the buds whisper, here again. Here, give me lilt and lyre, call ear to attention, soft fur and fire buzz, creatures of electric air, as the elder griot bows, agree now, in bronze grass, agree now that you were human. Unrelenting, unribboning song was song that brought me to him. In this lifetime, he finds me velvet back, nestled near a narrow haunt, sunned by red light, having remade myself boy, neon, unthroated. There's he. Shadowy stood little Orpheus, all asnurf, lireless, we look good in cosmic time. Graft we be spots of starlight storming, connected in Cassandra red conspiracy thread, all constellation like. On Wiki's authority, muses carried his strings to heaven, placed in dapple blacklessness star. Across a field of violet, exactly 2 forevers ago, he finally tells me to hush. Just pucker your lips, honey, pray, okay. Heels in the moss fenner's greeting. My matter who is mid-heaven, handful of thy name. Thy shore denied, thy quantum-eyed on earth, as exiled from heaven, teach us to crave our daily bread. Forgive us our sin as we forget those who sin against us. Steer us not out of temptation, but deliver us from evil. From thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. The next one is called Matthew the Am Not, and it's based on a poem written by my baby girl, Kopano Maroja, an incredible poet. We're both from the East Rand, and they wrote a beautiful collection that I feel like I'll always be studying from called Jesus Thesis. and other critical fabulations. So this is a poem that I wrote literally after them. Even formally, it kind of looks like them. So yes, the epigraph is by Jennifer Chang. Oh, flower once said, why aren't you meat? The poem begins. No, not plucked as in petal, but stole as in shawl or scarf or noose, depending on the fiber's fever. Anxiety and adjustment and disorder. Unwrap the chappie's wrapper yellow and blue and red and black. Unwrap the old South African flag orange and blue and white and black. Did you know? A tower struck by lightning is both epiphany and disaster. No, I hid my nuts beginning somewhere in a confession booth in Bedford View, babe. If I show you, how can you promise me that I won't burn like the rest of them? Stained as in stained grass, pressed as in Presbyteria, writer. Do you know what I mean? I don't have to be a boy for this part. Next one's called Mark the Flood. And again, we're back at the Bible. And the epigraph is, and behold, even I do bring a flood of waters upon the earth. Genesis 6, verse 17. I love that verse, by the way. Drama, drama, drama. Okay. And this poem is equally true. So yes, this is Mark the Flood. My fucking boots on the snow, my toes are freezing. We're both arrowed by desire, though. Double coil of a stubborn ram, while moving in night's dead hours, S has it in his head to walk to the ocean. We don't make it that far. Hammered at the parking lot by an ungovernable kiss, he opens for me. Gilled, fanned, I don't bother to pick at the fine bones. I'm too busy. Watching him gulp at the terrifying light spilling, I'm too busy. So when the cops arrive, we're understandably unaware. Miss, come with me, mister. Stay with my partner here, please. So stay here. Identification, please. Do you even identify as a, do you know why I pulled you aside? Do you know why? I don't know anything, babe. I'm in my Socratic era. Somewhere over his shoulder, the word solicitation floats out of his partner's mouth. Behold, babe, even I do bring a flood of waters upon the earth. Something of the hex makes it on my face a deadly mistake. As it dawns on him, we got this one wrong. Ma'am, sir, what you have to understand is. The next one's called Luke the Bone. Dramatic also. Over here, Mama made oxtail gelatinous, gleaming, stuck at the bone. Dimpled white dumplings stewing. The day the topaz arrived, a very simple sequence unfolded now that I think about it. The ring, her face falling, the question, her Russian running, the silence, the suck and sigh, the sister, Jehovah watching, the river, the false rain, the silence, the empty plate, the veiling, Judas again, my silver spoon scooping up the sea, the ache as echo, some brown skin, the silence, Mugabe, the wretched earth, Malume, a body in blankets, in love, and did you know, yellow and red and blue and black. What you have to understand is I fell. What you have to understand is this has been difficult for everyone. Last one. This one's called John the Black, but I think I want to rename it as John the Bruise. This one's a rhythm poem. As the curl, as the threat, as the truth, as the pain, as the sod, as the boy, as the act, as the acts, as the chest, as the church, as the turn, as the four, as the tongue, as the rope, as the dark, as the hurt, as the light, as the knife, as the whip, as the shade, as the shades, as the sigh, as the lie, as the roll, as the dome, as the gag, as the tooth, as the grass, as the grace, as the graze, as the good, as the bruise, as the past, as the past, as the past, as the pick, as the star, as the scarf, as the switch, as the scar, as the strike, as the shock, as the care, as the bind, as the shame, as the shame, as the same. 5 poems. Yes. Okay. All right. That feels really good to read also. And the first time that I've read it out loud, so thank you so much for holding me through that. Um, one that I actually just want to read now, because something about the rhythm feels quite good to read, is the Festina that I mentioned before, called Big. And super happy to know that it's living on the Red Wheelbarrow site, so I'll find it there. Okay. I love Sestinas, and I think I want to write a lot more. Okay, cool. Beg, Sestina for a Dom. Once ago, I swallowed a blood blossom and inked myself alive, dipped in revelry. Every day we puffed like owls, breath-backed as the new song of myself, and harmonied and honeyed as the past. If I gave it to you, where would you tuck my tongue? From the maybe vista of your pocket, teach it how to say yes, twice. Teach it doubly to say please yes. Ignore my shyness. This dance is double blossom spun. Does shame govern me? Yes. Send your tongue to me regardless. Be a poem. There, let hunger be tethered as an anchor, passed between the triptych shadows of myself, three-paned and bright. Let me sing myself tongued into your mouth. Let every song say yes to you. Soaked as I am in the past, I've been known to write the blossom into blood blooming, yet every day, in the nation of my mind, the ray of your tongue forges me open, pens me anew. Tongued in a new language, blood beats itself bruised, rushing to you, delicious as wine. Words shed their skins quickly when you talk. When you say yes, cities of doubt crumble into blossoms. Love light, I am trying to talk to you, but the past is a gag, slick with sometimes silence passed down, hereditary. History sucks as a segue, is not the corridor of blossoms we were promised in school, consoling ourselves with white pages and lunch boxes sealed in promise. Yes, our mothers will never know us like this. There is no country safe enough for this word. There could never be. Who could ever defend the border of the past? Please, let me be a river of yes, a prayer in black tongue, an ocean of myself, a many-bladed blossom. Make me a tongue, show me myself, flesh gated by teeth and promises, bright as blood. How are we doing? How are we feeling? Awesome. Yes, we love that. Love to hear it. Okay, cool. Wow, okay, now I'm very excited. There's one other one that I'm a bit nervous to read, but also it's, again, just because it's a new babe. I was asked by a really wonderful South African artist as well, Frances Goodman, who works with multimedia, but specifically she kind of does these really gorgeous sculptures using traditionally femme or feminine items. And my favorite ones is she makes these metallic, gorgeous, sort of snake-like sculptures out of acrylic nails. So my challenge was to kind of not to translate, but to create a sort of ekphrastic response to a piece of art. Ekphrasis being poems that are inspired by and written directly in response to a piece of art. Traditionally, it was like paintings, like in the 1800s, in the 1600s even, when we think about ekphrastic poems. But I wanted to um, think about reflection and the reflective sort of surface of acrylic nails. So I created a 5-poem blossom using internal reflections, so internal mirroring. So a line that with an image that is mirrored again and again and again. So hopefully that translates. It was very fun to play around with. Let me try and find it. Whee! Okay, mirror poem. The first, um, the first, okay, maybe as a disclaimer, um, Francis works with sort of deeply erotic, sexually explicit images, and I wanted to turn them on their head to think about eros as a site of information, as a way to think about the body, both as having a body and needing a body and desiring other bodies, but also the body of the state and how we're subjected to power in that sense. So let's see. the first um the first poem is called Choke Me Daddy. The epigraph is from Akoeke Emezi, from their book Dear Santuran. Bright heart loops a quick knot around doubt and strangles it. Both missing and founding fathers set the terms of this place. This is what I know. A death mask unhinged its jaw and gave us the men. The men gave their bricks to the pavement, death-jawed, betting surely on the blood color of black anger, knowing to twist our fury bloodly. Scale glittered as the stars are surely and just as nebulous, until we gave up that strange, fruited song, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Can you breathe, babe? How are you breathing in this fucking air? Is the forked tongue lapping up your skirt? Careful, the road forks up ahead either way. Doubt binds the heart with dull rope. Give me the nooses, careful glitter instead, sparkling with blood. Anyway, sweetest is the kiss that is blood-soaked, wouldn't you agree? All of us feathered things, finally, held in the maw of the scaly, systemic death-jawed. Sweetheart, open your beak for the question now. Are you starting to remember? The second one is called Good Boy, My Girl. And the epigraph is from a wonderful queer and trans poet called Jason Persuel from their collection Swirlening. And the quote is, bask in the summer of fathers dying. Here's the poem. Good boy, my girl. Cinnamon crusted sugar smile on her. Fresh fruit in the book bowl. An offering from the islands. Gillian sings to me, and the sky opens. Our laughter so honey-soaked, the table collapses, weak beneath. Island fruit spilling all over the balcony, soft tumbling like the story you make of me, true out your mouth. I point the lens at you, watch you mime, I love you, in the air. Make the second and the video 15 seconds just so I can post it on my IG, an unsegmented story. Already pinning a song to your smile, my mirror makes more of you in all your many-minded magic. You string my fear up by its feet, hanging him, stem skyward like a dried out bouquet. Third poem is called More, More, More. And the epigraph is from an incredible Black trans woman, poet, one of my favorite. Her name is Giselle James, also known as J Dodd. And this epigraph comes from a poem called La Belle Dame Sans Merci. And the quotation is, we know the wrong ontologies of beauty, the beholders, the beheaded at the behest, the best of beyond, the lack of complaint. So the poem begins. Draw me a line from that photo of Diana Ross eating a rib in Alabama, the one in the Morgan Parker poem, to that clip of Nkuli, hip swaying, Venus as a babe, cat-eyed in a Kangol sporty crop top and sucking all of the eyes in the room toward her like a bone. Tell me, how many licks will it take till we get to the center of this redacted? Streets heave under the weight and the weight of red and yellow roses, each one blooming where a trans woman should be. Blue gemmed and gleaming, singing throat songs from the street. This line is sinew soaked in lip gloss. Wrap me in it, bind me. Is this what it will take for us to remember ourselves? I mean, I'll ask the question another way. Who wouldn't want to suck the rib that made her? Fourth one is a conversation. It's a contrapuntal. My favorites. Love them. And the epigraph is from an incredible poet, also trans, Black trans. Their name is Kemi Alabi. They published an incredible collection called Against Heaven that I keep going back to. And one of my favorite poems is a poem called 44 Questions to Ask While Binging. And one of my favorite questions in these 44 questions that they ask, which is like, oh, so beautiful. One of the questions is, what makes them hands at all? So this poem imagines a conversation between the snake in Eden, whose handless, armless, limbless, and another speaker. So on this side of the page is this poem. Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And the snake responds, why would you even decrease the value of my Lawala below what we agreed upon, Booty? All I did was talk to her. She took a bite of an apple and now I'm fucked forever. Comments. Last one. This poem's called Mommy, Sorry, Mommy. And it's the title is from a popular TikTok, or like a clip from a TikTok that lesbians were responsible for proliferating on the internet, and I appreciate them. Shout out to lesbians, love you guys so much. And the epigraph is from Safia El-Hilo, one of my favorite poets, from her new book, Girls That Never Die. And the epigraph is, my mother is almost my mother now, darker color of the new time sun. This one's my favorite one in the 5 poems. Under the surface of the green water, I begin to remember my handlessness, all limb instead, my scales gleaming, darkly ancient again. Kay and I swim instead of speaking. Every man in me submits to the authority of the land, the water, and its guardians. Makes way for mother, utopic, compromise. I don't feel my brown, brass-belled chest in the water. Its mass suspended for me. Floating, we let ourselves dream about the knife, the one that visits our dreams and whispers its edge doubled song. Let me cut you, baby. Aren't you a boy? Dark fins underwater swaying in response. No, mama, but I am asking for it. Okay, that's Mama. I wanted to end off with poems from the book, mostly just as a way to say, oh, this is where we started, and also to discover them anew every time I read them newly. So I didn't make a decision about which one to read, but I wanted it to be a feeling. But I think I have a feeling about which one I want to read today. Okay. I really love this one. I don't know why. Okay. So Two poems from the book. One of them, the first one that I want to read is called Colocasia Delta, after Gina Anvili, who's also one of my favorite poets in the world. She wrote a poem that I recently rediscovered called Lessons on Loving a Prophet. It's a list poem, and I love list poems. I don't think we read list poems enough. So if there's a list poem that you're sitting on, please, even if it's just for me, can you publish? I want to see. I love listicles. If you're wondering if anyone wants to read them, there is one lowly little human who wants to read, more or less. But this this poem is about the moment that I told my then partner what had happened to me. This was me trying to search for words about very soon after my assault, after I came back from being home. It happened here in South Africa, but I was splitting my time between here and Coast Salish territories, commonly known as Vancouver, Canada. And yeah, I couldn't find words. I remember trying to search for language, and this poem is about this grasping for language and not finding anything. Colocasia Delta. He is hungry and sweet. He is an open palm, but she is a jar of flies tonight. Waiting for the 99, she tells the story while holding groceries. It is about a striped pole in the middle of the ocean. It is about a yellow line, two tongues hiding in a mine dump. She is a cracked thread spreading on a windshield. The sound of her mouth is anything but crystal. He is trying to understand, but the bus is here. He is an open palm, so they walk. She is a green dress unraveling. This story is a gulping thing, alive. On the corner of Broadway and Balaclava, he begins to understand. Braces near a bench as it dawns, terrified now of the water. When the story finally arrives, everything black is a river. She is a delta now, unsedimented and wide, a shattering category veined blue with narrative. No longer an open palm made sharp with shock, he wants a reckoning. A case file yawning open, a courtroom brimmed with judges, a banishing, a punishment. The water recedes, leaving her grocery bags leaking, both of them damp now, forgetting the way home. One more from the book. Recently someone asked on Twitter, or is it X now? Yes. On that place, that bird up, which teachers gave you something really important or invaluable. And one of my dearest teachers in the whole world is Otonia Juliana Koptek, an incredible Ugandan poet who wrote a collection called 100 Days, tracking, in conversation with the Kenyan artist Wangechi Mutu, tracking each day of the Rwandan genocide. And very recently just came out with a book called A is for Acholi. But this is a poem about the moment that Julie taught me what I needed to know in order to write this book. Called Ars Poetica 2. There are 3 of them in the book because I'm a nerd. But this one's for Julie. Poetry is a crater. Poetry is a stalling witness. There are dogs at the door, and they won't let me sleep. Every poem is a root, both nascent and dying, and the ravishing ferment, the only part of the plant I want to flower. Every poem is touched by the leaden soil. I am awake to appetite and expectation. I am aware of the boisterous, fizzy market for trauma, the rancid red meat of identity. I was very afraid until you asked, "Where are the dogs now? What do they sound like when they bark?" Julie, I am a witness. Julie, I am learning my lines. I will see you at the bench again after this play is over and the bones are clean. Thank you. Thanks so much. I feel like yeah, there's more to read. There's always more to read, but I thought that this is a good spot to end off, and that I'm always here like a good DJ. I'm available for requests because I know there's folks here that know the deep cut. But yeah, I love questions, so get me chatting and I'll talk your ears off, I promise. Thank you for listening, and thank you for bearing witness to this really sweet and very messy space of in-betweenness right before I sort of away and lock myself away in November to write my second collection. So thank you so much for being such a wonderful testing.
Thank you. Wow. Yo, could we maybe put our mics on and give Maneo a round of applause before we open the floor to questions and answers? It's questions and comments.
Really appreciate it.
Okay. Bring your body
Janelle,
with you when you speak. Wow. Okay.
I learned that from a wonderful trans poet called C.A. Conrad, who I'm obsessed with, who a lot of their writing is through the soma to think about somatics, to think about the body. So yeah, bring the body with you when you think. It's a good thing to remember.
Really is. And we sometimes forget that we write from our bodies. Yeah. The gut is also a brain, and the heart, all of it. Please raise your hands, and then I will just kind of go as the hands appear. We can do it in that order. I do have some questions, but I'll wait. I'm about 17. I'm joking. Not 17. Yo. Jacques, please go for it.
I didn't think I wanted to be first, but okay.
Hi, Jacques. It's so good to see you.
Great to be here. It's great to be in the room with you. And what a moving reading. And what I mean, there are many things I would like to ask, but the first thing that strikes me is I can't remember a single reading I've been to where I heard so many names of really good poets that I've never heard of.
It's a good thing. I love to hear that. Love to hear that.
And that's so I'm fascinated by this tradition that you talk about. I mean, there are many ways to describe it. I mean, I'm sort of just glimpsing from the outside, but I love this moment that you describe of almost religion after religion or ritual after ritual, this place that is jubilant and sad and sacred and horny, this kind of this where do we start reading? How, where do you, what is the place where you would say to someone, this is where you
yeah.
start?
Oh, I can go. Oh yes. I think in terms of my own thinking, the sort of primary centering grounding text is Audre Lorde's Uses of the Erotic, as a Black feminist politic, just to ground me about not just, though I do take umbrage, and this is just because I'm a little shit, like I do take a little bit of the umbrage, which he makes a connection between the pornographic and the erotic, and sort of dismisses the pornographic as exclusively about sensation. But I think that I'm really, as a queer poet from a very queer tradition, I'm obsessed with sensation. And I really want to live inside of that space, because I think that sensation as a portal, as a gateway into thinking about the body as a thinking thing, as an ecosystem in itself, was the beginning for me. And then I got really nerdy in the sort of like critical philosophical space. So I really love Barthes, Roland Barthes. Ooh,
But
um,
yes.
Barthes, The Pleasure of the Text. And that's a text that I really love, and that's been really beautiful. Munoz also, because I'm a huge blood whore for Munoz, and but specifically thinking about queer futurity. And I think that's where the silence and the sadness when I think about ritual comes from, because I think about my own queerness deeply informed by Munoz as a thing that's not yet here, as a thing to grasp for in the future forever. But in terms of like the theory sort of space, that's definitely in that space. But the poetic contemporary voices that I'm thinking about that are asking me to think about ritual in new ways of Black trans poets like Kemi Alabi, whose uh, collection, I think I'll type it in the chat also, if folks want to see what I'm talking about. But their collection Against Heaven is just treatise after treatise, not just because I think it can be quite facile to fall into a deep oppositional space when it comes to religious imagery. At least for me, I was in that space. I remember what that is like. Fuck all of this. Fuck this shit. It's all bullshit. And then I'm now in a sort of space of deep appreciation for the ways in which words move the body into position. And no one does that well. No one does that as well, at least when I think about the effect that doctrine, word, text, the word, logos, all of that has on my body, even on a visceral level, even when it comes to a rejection, even the word abomination, which used to be my favorite word to spell when I was 3. I loved spelling abomination. I would also spell Armageddon as a way to stim and relax. So I think there's a part of me that looks back at that and wants to see and pick it apart and look at it with a kind of curiosity. And I think that there's always been inherently this dual function in me, this sort of, I can look at disgusting things. And I think I'm deeply attracted to the monstrous, the grotesque, the violent. And I think a lot about, not just because I come from two traditions. My father is where I get the Catholicism part, because that's where I get that from, but specifically through a Black church called Garagas Puri. And then another on my mother's side is Jehovah's Witnesses, which is in itself a very, very, when it comes to being a queer person and a Black trans person, a deeply oppressive doctrine. But there's still incredible poetry. And I think I'm very interested in the ways in which fascism starts to mirror religious text. And there's a kind of fascist moment that we're living inside of right now that I'm unbelievably fascinated by, in its endless spawning of new creative violences, especially in this new century. Yeah, I'm riffing now.
That's encouraging, because I experienced that and I just feel dismayed. So I'm encouraged by the way you're energized by it, because that's how that's how you
Curiosity.
fight it. If you're dismayed, you become paralyzed.
Exactly. And I think curiosity is a way, especially with something quite disgusting. I think I can stay curious to say, what about this is so ugly and so dark? And what about this is also appealing to the ugliness and darkness in me? the shadowy parts of me, the parts of me that feel quite good being marched into position, to being placed into position, to be told what to think. And there's also something quite moving. I'm thinking specifically about tradition and Black sonic tradition specifically. Like there's nothing that moves me deeper than Black song, that Black song in the church. And in all of its different kind of, yeah, I am really interested in that, because when you scratch even one level down, you're finding words and text and beliefs and doctrines that don't want me to exist, actively don't want me to exist in the life that I lead. So I think instead of approaching that with a kind of dismay, I think there's a kind of curiosity to be like, why do you think that you have the authority to negate my experience? What gives you that right? I'm really interested in where you think that power is grounded, and if that power is as stable as you think it is.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques, for
Thank you
your,
for asking.
yeah, thank you for asking. There's a beautiful I think it's Ocean Wong. I write what is it?
I feel like with Ocean you could
Writing,
quote
writing
anything.
about the, I write so I can feel larger than the limits of my body. You know, that kind of sentiment, and we approach these uncomfortable, these violent things with care, because we experience the world, we experience all these things from within our bodies, so we have to do it carefully. I was very fascinated by your treatment of the intertext. It's very intertextual, and even the kind of religious commentary. It's just this notion that everything we encounter in text is a continued conversation. Whenever you approach a poem, a collection, this written text, there's an opportunity to talk, and so it becomes limitless. So thank you for the intertext. I will go back to the recording to write down all of these names and expand my horizons. I think Melissa has a question.
Hello, Melissa.
Good to hear you read, and I love listening to you talking about writing, talking about your writing, and just sharing
So
the
good to
space
see
with
you
you. It's
also.
always special. Yeah.
Yeah, and so soon after Stellies, it's so good to see your face.
Yes. And I'm very, very excited to hear that you have another book in the works. That's really cool. We cannot wait for that, I'm sure.
Also me.
So yeah, my question, I even typed it out. That's how nerdy I was for you.
I love it.
Never
I love
done
it.
that before.
I love it. Oh, I love it. Give it to me, please.
So your poems, they're so powerful on the page, and both in a cerebral way, and hearing you talk about it, we really get to kind of get more of a sense of the thought that goes into the structure and all of that. But then obviously also in the heartful way. But then when you read them aloud, I feel we get a whole new layer, a new vein. They're almost recreated in your own, getting to hear them in your own voice. A lot of your work also has this intense musicality and the rhythm, and almost like a meditative or prayer-like quality. So I'm curious if you want to speak a bit about what reading aloud, or the spoken version, is, and how that comes into your writing process, how soon it comes in, and so on.
Oh yeah. I think, excellent question. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I love a nerd. And also thanks for the praise. Yes, I'm always gonna welcome that. Thanks. What I love the most about rhythm, and I've been thinking very seriously about rhythm, especially the syllabic, and try to notice like syllables and like there's patterns that are very pleasing to me. I know from like from writing the coda for Gabrielle that I love an octosyllabic line, 8 syllables in a line, feel so good. And I like breaking them up, especially with punctuation. So like 2 and like full stop and 2 and a full stop and 2 and a full stop also feels quite good. And on the level of whether I write that way, I think I used to do it quite intuitively, but I think now, because I'm very curious about my own process and what is going on in this noggin, like what's happening in this noodle, I think I'm trying to approach my own craft with the same kind of curiosity that I approach with all things. So when it comes to rhythm, with more meditative pieces like John, now the Bruise, I think I've decided it's not John Black and White's John Bruise, the last in the Semana sequence. I think I was already thinking about rhythm and the impetus behind that kind of like as the good, as the grace, as the gray, as the I think what I wanted to explore was how deep I could turn a spiral until it didn't matter what it is that I said, until you're given over to the engine of the poem, that the engine in itself perhaps it has something more interesting to say than the content. And I think poetry, you can do that. It's so fun because you can really atomize every single process. And I think I've found a Swedish philosopher, Wittgenstein, whose concept of the language game is really exciting to me. Um, and I'm getting nerdier in that space, but I am still exploring. And the idea of the language game is also that level, that all language is on the level of this of a exchange of power, of exchange of meaning, but nothing can exist in and of itself, especially not, we can never isolate a word and strip it completely of its meaning. But I think with rhythm asks you to suspend yourself outside of meaning. I think the same thing can happen with rhyme. I think in high school we were ruined a little with staying away from rhyming stuff. But as being someone who's also deeply inspired by and draws on a lot of hip hop and rap, like rhythm activated poetry, I like a rhyme, though I don't use them. I think rhyme is also a way to sensitize me to techniques of seduction, like little tools that I can. Also, if you notice me reading, I'm a very alliterative poet. I'm an alliteration wherever I can find one, I'll put them. And I used to be really shy about that. I used to be really self-conscious because it felt like I was calling attention to the poem's artifice and I was trying to show off. But I do. I love showing off. I want you to see that I can write and I want you to praise me for it. And I think I'm less shy about that now, that it's like I want you to take deep delight in language as I show you what I can do with it. And rhythm, as well as like tools of rhythm, and which alliteration is my favorite. But I think I want to play around, especially with pentameter, like especially with iambic pentameter, because I feel like the 17-year-old in me really wants to do something like nasty with some pentameter. Yeah. So yeah, sometimes it's an experiment that I put upon myself before I come to the page, like with the sestina. It's like I'm gonna write a sestina and see what happens. But a lot of the time it's something that happens as very naturally, very intuitively, which gives me great hope because then my brain can't get in the way.
So much. I think delight is definitely the word that I feel when I hear you and read your work.
Thank you, Melissa. Oh, in the open mic section, if there is time and if you have it around, could you read that amazing poem about the sun? The I'm Not Special one. I cannot stop thinking about it. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Wonderful. Could you maybe tell us about the renaming of John the Bruce? That was
Yeah. So in reading, and this is also something that I'm discovering by reading to you all, that I love, and this is also something, if you've encountered my poems on the page, I really enjoy the parenthetical. I really like posting information inside of brackets, like saying something and then saying something else. And the kind of visual relationship with of what we can do with parenthesis inside of the body of the text, because we're already trained to understand that as superfluous information, like extra information or like side information. So John the Black, formerly John the Black, and now John the Bruise, because it's on the screen. John the Bruise, I think, why I want to call it John the Bruise instead of John the Black, I think in reading through the 5 poems sequence I don't know if you heard, but in Paternoster, in Midheaven, and also very like lower when I'm starting to talk about anxiety and adjustment and disorder, and talking about the South African flag and like the chappies wrapper that keeps coming up inside of the sequence. I think that there's a kind of it's weird to explain, but I think that the word black wants me to respect it a little bit more and to give it a little bit more space. And in calling the poem John the Black, I think that placing black in parenthesis when it was in smaller case and in like earlier on in the poem, I think that there's something that wants to, so strange to kind of talk about in language, but I think that black wants to have its own moment. And the bruise, why I think I want to call the meditative, strange sort of languagey syllabic poem, the last one, why I want to call it the bruise, is that there's something, especially with bruises for me, because I have a really interesting relationship with pain, but there's like this impulse to want to push on a bruise, like keep coming back to it. And that like ending a poem on a bruise for me feels a little bit more resonant as the part of the the spot in the poem that feels most tender, but the one that you want to touch the most because it's the one that doesn't want to give up its secrets as easily. So by saying John the Bruise, I'm going, come back to me and press on me, see what's happening here. I think that's why I want to call it the bruise instead of the black. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Fascinating. I think we could talk for hours. But I am mindful of time. I wonder if there are a few more questions before I ask you what's next. I know you're doing Fractured here. Ed has his raised hand, and then maybe you can tell us where we can see you, hear you, and that sort of thing. Go for it, Edward.
Thank you. Maneo, great to hear your voice.
Great to see you.
Yeah, as with your previous readings, so many lines that just leap out, and I was even going to quote them back to you, but I'm also
My
aware
favorite thing.
Okay, a couple. Let me sing myself tongued into your mouth. Words shed their wings quickly when you talk. Gives breath to the lungs of poem. She's a crack spreading on a windshield. The ruined red meat of identity. Okay, there's more.
Thank you.
Yes, but,
Thank you. Those were gifts. Thank you.
I also found the intertextual, the conversations fascinating. But Lisa's already, so my question will go somewhere else. I just wondered about the relationship for you between the writing of poems and the other writing that you do. You have this amazing or so it seems to me, way of just taking on perspectives, going into things, really going into things. And I wondered, I wondered if that's part of the relationship between the poetry and the other writing, or how that could be perspectives and analysis, but that's very reductive.
No, that's a fantastic question. And one that's tough to answer, I think, in the sense that there's a way that poetry asks questions of me that nothing else asks me. Questions like that in that particular cadence. And I think there's a way that, and this is something that was wonderful that Philippa Jaar de Villiers gave back to me. And she said that my poems are quite silent, and use silence, and like to use silence as a substance. And I think because of that, I've become more interested in silence. One of my loves, and a person I love so much, is a professor at my alma mater. Their name is J. Logan Smodges, and they wrote a book called Queer Silence. That made me really think about that quality in my work. In other spaces, especially because I came into at least the South African sort of media space as a music journalism baby. I think that as my entryway has helped, and especially in hearing Melissa now talking about the musicality in my poetry, I am always thinking about rhythm, and not just on the level of the text. I think I'm always thinking about rhythm and song and sonics. So as a result, that there is that kind of relationship with wanting to write about sound and knowing that there's an inherent failure in even beginning, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. That weird saying about like writing about music is like dancing about architecture, but like I would love to dance about all things. I'll throw my ass in the circle for anything, like at at the drop of a hat. In that sense, like there is a relationship between the music journalism and the poetry in more longer form and more sort of nebulous spaces, especially now that I'm thinking about fiction and I'm starting to write fiction, which is very scary. Always feels like a weird thing when a poet writes about fiction. It always feels like, oh, another one bites the dust. But I think because I can't help, even in the way that I speak, even in when I try and speak about language and I'm speaking about myself, there is a being a poet is an occupational hazard. I think I bring a sense of the poetic to all of my writing, which makes me suspect that perhaps poetry is the spine from which all things sort of spread. But the more that I write, the more that everyone informs everybody is in a mixing bed, is just all over each other. And the less I'm inclined to separate. Some writers I look to and make me feel quite good about being a bit of a scatterbrain. People like Hanif Abdurraqib, who as a poet, like is so prolific in the essay form. And I've been reading really beautiful poems as essays. So Teju Cole came out with a really gorgeous collection of essays that I love very much, and Fred Moten and Samuel Delaney, just like black faggots in the world, being wonderful and using language. And from Fred, especially now, I'm learning my rights. I'm reclaiming my right, but learning it through him. My right to opacity, to my right to not making meaning, my right to being nebulous, my right to turn my back in the text, my right to turn my back on the reader, in the text. And I think poetry gives me that that space and also that kind of safety to hide and tell secrets in plain. I'm trying, especially the scariest and most vulnerable of my poems is when I'm speaking very plainly. When I say the rancid red meat of identity, I really mean that kind of rotten way in which especially Black, trans, queer writers, especially writers on the margins, are asked to sort of place our traumas in these beautifully like packaged, marketable space like ways in order to be legible to a particular kind of reader. And I don't want to disrespect my readers that way, to say, and I also don't want to play around with the dangerous sort of rhetoric of transcending race. But I think I want to nudge at something, at the problem, to say that we are implicated in this thing and we are together. You are in the poem with me. I'm in the world with you, and you are in the poem with me, because not because you're stuck here, but because I want you here. I'm inviting you in. And the discomfort that we feel is I'm hoping generative. Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it's fascinating. Yeah, the poems definitely, I like the idea of them being the spine. And it's there in the imagery as well in the poems. There's lots to decode. Nothing is spelt out. So, and neatly packaged. Thank
I
you.
think the decoding part is also really fun. When I think about my favorite poems, I think about encountering Cummings for the first time. And that was the first, when I want to talk about the parenthetical, like, come on, no one did it better in the sense of wanting you to encounter something so quotidian and so mundane, but in a way that is, I'm going to show it estranged on the page so that you meet it anew in the world. And by using the parenthesis as so many things, but also using the parenthesis on the level of just seeing one of them isolated on the page as an icon, and thinking about the moon. Oh, I love him, hey? Love him. R.I.P. Cummings Boyser. Love you, Boyser.
Okay. Please tell us what's next. I will see you at the Open Book Fest, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm doing 4 panels this year for Open Book. So if you are down in Cape Town, please come through. It's just, I mean, some of the panels that I'm on are just a dream come true for the little boy. I don't know what to do. If you think I'm nervous now, like, the nerves in Cape Town are going to be quite intense. But there's 2 books that I'm writing right now that I'm very excited about. One is a chapbook, one is a short little baby that I'm hoping is with you very soon. It's called Boy Bride. All about the process of trying to get married to my partner and how messy that's been. And yes, I'm taking great aims against the church. And then the second book that I think is going to be my full length, the one that is my little albatross right now, is a book called Felt, and is all about Johannesburg. I want to write about Johannesburg. I'm writing about Johannesburg. So, and I'm thinking about also because, especially with the poets in this room that have read me, like, you know me, I'm obsessed with threes. So I'm thinking about the high felt, the middle felt, and the low felt in ways that are both so connected to my own story and being born, bred, and buttered in Joburg, but specifically from the Eastern Rand. But I think I want to start thinking about the gold. I really want to start thinking about mining and gold and the stories that this city has told of itself and what it's become, and not in sort of like a vox words, like a voice of God sort of way. I think I want to place myself as a little ant on the ground and think about the gold. So those are the 2 books that are coming. I'm so excited. And it's wild to say it now because I don't think I've been excited. I don't think I've said it to myself to say I'm excited to write these books, but I am. I'm very excited to write these books for you.
Well, we look forward to reading it and listening to you at open book. Maneo, Mohale, everybody. Place your hands, place your cloth. Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll continue. Oh dear, stop.